Welcome to the second episode in a series where I'm providing updated information for my DIY PCB tutorial. A little bit of a gap since my last video. I guess that's the way it goes sometimes. The good news is that in the last couple of months I've been making some rather important improvements to the whole process and getting even better results and reducing the amount of work time required to get the PCBs made. I'm actually still grinding away on some issues right now, and all this sort of takes a bit of time. So in any case, I thought it'd be prudent to release some videos for the things that looked already pretty well locked in. So in this episode, I'm going to revisit the method of how to apply and cure the resin. But let's have a quick review of how we actually got to the point that we're at today. So my first effort used a plastic and glass sheet sandwich to press the resin onto the surface. And this is a method I think I directly took from a Wegster video that I saw many years ago. And then I switched to actually using a Silkscreen ring. And if I remember correctly, I think I also saw it on Webster, but I probably saw it somewhere else as well. It's not exactly an original method, I'd say. And then in my last tutorial video I released, I'm actually just using small cut-off pieces of the silkscreen that I hold by hand and then apply it onto the board. I really like that method because you don't need to use heaps of IPA to clean the silkscreen, and you can just throw it away when you're done. And I also think I get a better finish as you have better control when you're actually lifting the silkscreen up off the work. But I'm always keeping my mind open to try to find better ways to improve any of my processes. And a while back, one of my viewers who has his own channel, Tanky Turk, made a video for me to show me how he applied his UV resin using a brayer. And that's also known as a rubber roller, I guess. I believe he took his inspiration from something he saw from another channel, so you can sort of see how this stuff goes around and around. Anyway, be sure to check out his channel if you're interested in that sort of stuff. So I wanted to compare the roller method against the silkscreen method that I'm already using. So I went out and bought the cheapest reasonable looking rubber roller I could find, and I gave it a go. Anyway, to cut to the chase, I didn't really succeed in getting a great finish with the roller that I had. And I generally felt that sticking with the silkscreen was a better fit for my situation for various reasons, and some of them likely just personal biases in there too. I am, however, entirely convinced that Tanky Turk is getting a good finish with the roller he's using, and that it works well for him. So for sure, this is a problem with something that I'm doing. So if you're interested in giving the roller a try, for sure, it's probably a very viable option. So sure, give it a go. But there was one super important thing that Tanky Turk caught my attention with when I watched his process. He stated that by pre-baking the resin in an oven, he could cut the UV exposure down to 5 minutes, which honestly blew my mind considering that it requires at least 30 minutes to expose the green UV resin that I'm currently using. Now, pre-baking UV resin was not at all new to me. This is an absolutely critical part of my white text silkscreen overlay process that I use, and something that was actually brought to my attention originally by another viewer quite a while back. Anyway, that viewer stated that by pre-baking the UV resin, it gave him near instantaneous curing when he hit it with the laser. However, with the fast curing mechanic resin that I was using, I never really saw any change in the curing speed after baking. And I know I was doing meticulous testing at times, so I'm pretty confident in my results that I was getting. But even with the inability to get that fast curing time, what I did get was a spectacular quality improvement. And that's why I include it in that current process. Anyway, the long and the short of it is that my experience here told me that baking likely did not give any notable curing time changes. So when I saw Tanky's video saying that he got 5-minute curing time after baking, I suspected this must be something specific to the type of resin he was using or something else that was going on. Anyway, it piqued my interest enough to go out and test it again with the WNB green gloop UV resin that I use. So I followed the same pattern that I used for baking the white UV resin for the text overlay, that being placing it on my hot plate set at 80 degrees and leaving it there for 10 minutes to bake. And unsurprisingly, I guess, as I got with the white resin, you can really see the effects of the volatiles being baked off when you've got it sitting there on the hot plate. And the resin really sits down flat onto the surface. It's actually a very sort of pleasing effect when you look at it. Anyway, after that, I put it under my 50-watt UV LED panel for exactly 5 minutes, expecting complete failure if I'm honest. But to my surprise, it actually came out fully cured. So this is completely awesome news, saving up to 15 minutes for every UV coating action. So for a single-sided board, that saves me up to 30 minutes. And for a double-sided board, it could be anything up to an hour saved. And that's a huge improvement. Anyway, I got to give Tanky a huge thanks for sharing his process and stimulating me to try out a couple of new things. And even though I have not actually ended up using that roller process, I think it really made me think about the issues that I do have with my current silkscreen process and how I could probably further improve it. For example, handling those pieces of silkscreen by hand, holding it in place, removing it smoothly, and then storing it between the plastic sheets. It was all a little bit fiddlier than I would have liked. I also find that by holding the silkscreen down with my fingertips causes some sort of tensions differences as I screed the UV resin. And this can result in lines of slightly thicker resin being applied to the board. And that's something that's not really helped by the cheap $1 rubber spatula that I've been using. It basically lacks any backbone. But one of the things I really did like about the process that I'd come up more recently is that you could actually store those cut-off pieces of used silkscreen between those plastic sheets and leave them for days on end, and then go back and reuse them without a problem. Anyway, that reduces the waste quite exceptionally. I even expect you could likely store and continually reuse the silkscreen for an indefinite period. Though I doubt you could expect to leave it unused sitting on the shelf for a year and then expect it to be usable. Maybe you could leave it unused for a month or two. I guess that might be possible, but those sort of things only time will tell. So based on all that experience, I came up with this combined silkscreen holder and storage unit, something that you could 3D print yourself if you want to. I'll be sure to put it up on Printables should anyone want to do that. So to keep the light out, it basically has 3 layers of protection. The outer box itself, which is easily slid off, and this clamshell inner section, which opens up like this. And here we can see this double-sided tape, which is the 3rd layer of protection. Now the double-sided tape is spongy and has super strong adhesion, and it's originally intended to be used to attach kitchen panels to walls, so it has to be pretty strong, I guess. It's 20 millimeters wide and it measures at around about 1.1 millimeters thick. And I apply 4 strips on each half, as you can see here. And then I've cut a piece of this plastic folder to fit inside, and it also acts as the hinge for the clamshell. The plastic itself of this folder is around about 0.16 millimeters. The silkscreen holder itself is actually 3 pieces. It has a TPU strip on the bottom here, which is my rather meager effort to try and give it a little bit more grip when using it. And the main plastic body is actually 2 pieces, which clamp together to hold the silkscreen in place. You can see it has a bunch of these teeth that sort of grip onto the silkscreen, which works pretty well. But I also generally suggest having about a 5mm of excess hanging out the back here, which you would fold up at 90 degrees and put some masking tape on there to hold it in place. I found that really gives it the maximum holding strength. So the design of the holder itself is such that you now get a much more even pressure across the silkscreen when you screed it, and it holds the silkscreen up at an approximate height of the board, so it sort of stops the silkscreen from bowing up and over and creating those weird effects that I sometimes got. Of course, moving the silkscreen around now and holding it in place and lifting the silkscreen off the PCB in a controlled fashion is much easier now that you have a handle to grip on. So I've actually been using it for a little while now, and I found it really great to use. And I think one of the great things is the fact that you can quickly put it away and keep the dust out of it, keep things clean, and the handling is much more easier. And obviously you get a much better result on the board as well. So at this point in time, I've only actually printed out 3 of them, but I'll likely print out a couple more so that I can work with a mix of different colors at the same time. Probably the only slight change I would make is something that I discovered by accident due to a small print defect on one of the printouts that I made. You can see here that a piece is missing off the corner where the print failed, right? Well, it turns out that by having that piece missing, it actually makes it easy to grip and open and close. So if you're going to print this out, what I'd recommend you can do is actually snip off this top edge, maybe by about 5mm is enough. You just need enough to get your fingertip in there. And I'll actually do this one right now. Yeah, there you go. It's much better. Alright, so the final big improvement I made to my process was to go out and buy a proper silkscreen screed. I think it cost around about $6, but it was well worth the investment. Alright, let's take a quick look at all of the things that I recommend you have on hand if you're going to repeat this process that I'm going to demonstrate. So this is what you're going to need. The UV resin, of course, which I'm typically using this gloopy WMB resin or a clone of that. So far I've done a little bit of testing with the red and that works good, but I haven't quite tuned that in yet, and I've sort of been focusing on using the green just to minimize the variables, but it looks like the red or maybe the blue is going to work good as well. You're going to need this silkscreen mesh. I use a white 150 mono thread mesh. Probably something else would work too, or maybe something might even work better, but this is all I have and this has always worked for me, so really that's all I can recommend at this time. And of course, I highly recommend my new silkscreen holder and storage box, but you do whatever you want in that regards, I guess. You'll need a UV resin extraction and application tool. I use the smooth, rounded end of this plastic toothbrush, which I found works really well. So if you can get something similar of shape, then that's what I recommend you do. You will also need a proper silkscreen screed. This one's about 7mm thick, so it's pretty thick. and it's about 100 millimeters wide, and I found that works pretty well for me. I also recommend having one more rubber spatula on hand for helping with the cleaning and moving the resin around. This one here is the one that I originally used for applying the resin, but now I'm using it as the handling device. And this one here is also around about 100 millimeters wide, and again I find that's quite a useful size as well. I also recommend having a mobile clean surface. In my case, I had this piece of glass stuck to a cut off of a piece of wood, and I find the glass is nice to work on because it's pretty easy to keep clean and reuse. So that's what I've always used, and it works pretty well for me. You're going to need some masking tape, something around about 80 millimeters wide or so. And you're also going to need a temperature controlled hot plate or an oven to bake the resin with. I also have this metal scraper on hand, and I use that to remove the PCB from the hot plate when it's really hot, and it sort of helps it sort of cool down a little bit quicker as well. So I suggest if you can have one of those on hand, that's always something that I find quite useful to have. And of course, you're going to need the UV light exposing device to expose the UV resin with. And in my case, my UV box is made with a 50 watt LED panel, and I found that works pretty good. Of course, finally for the cleanup, you're going to need some IPA, maybe a couple of tissues, and I recommend having a piece of scrap lint-free cloth on hand as well. And that's it. So let's get into the practical demonstration. So for this demonstration, I've actually already pre-polished and cleaned the PCB with IPA, and that's something I've demonstrated in my last big tutorial, so I won't be showing that again here today. I will say, however, if you're going to do a surface mount PCB using solder paste, then pre-polishing the PCB is an absolute must with this process. But if you're just doing a through-hole hand-soldered PCB, then just cleaning with Scotch-Brite and IPA will probably be just fine. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is stick down the PCB to the working surface. Now I have been using double-sided tape historically, but it's actually a little bit difficult to handle. I've sort of switched to using masking tape because there's a couple of benefits. One is that by having a slight overlap on the edge, stops any resin buildup on that edge. So it also keeps the sides of the board clean, and that helps with your accuracy when you're aligning the board and relocating the board in the locating guides. So about, if you can, maybe about a 1 millimeter overlap. Just stick it down. Do that on all sides. Now when you do the mask layer, or the second coat, you can probably go in a little bit further because the actual board is inside a little bit further. But for this first coat, I want to minimize the amount of unnecessary etching. And obviously if we're not coating the edges of this board, that's going to be etched off, and that's going to make the etchant solution have to work a little bit harder. So there's a little bit of waste on the etching solution. So we want to keep that to be as small as possible. So with that done, we can now apply the UV resin. So get your little application stick out. And this is always a bit tricky. I try to get it dead center so I don't get any on the edge of the stick. And you pull it out and you'll see it sort of dribbling down there. If you rotate it one way and then rotate it the other way, it will usually snap off. And there should be plenty on there for this particular run. So this is where the mobile board comes into handy because you can sort of move it around and move it to an easy position to work. Now I try to force the UV resin into the surface. I've always done that. Maybe it's just a placebo effect, I'm not really sure. But I don't believe, I have this idea that the silkscreen, the weave, actually contacts with the surface, and where the weave is pressing down, it's possible that the surface adhesion may not be as good there. So my idea is that by pushing it down into all of the surface first, we're sort of promoting the bond between the resin and the PCB surface. Okay, so now I'm going to get out my little container here, and typically I'll just pop the cover off, flip it over, and this one here, as you can see, I've already been using, so we're just going to continue to reuse that. Place it over the work, and I usually come away so that I'm not placing it this surface on the tape, just off the tape a little bit. And then hold it as you like, but you want to hold it pretty firm onto the surface so it doesn't slide around. And then get your screed. Now these screeds here, they have this wooden edge. Sometimes I found that some particulate comes off the edge of that board, of that wood. So it's probably a good idea to seal that if you can, but for now, just be aware that that is an issue that I've encountered. I'm just going to give it a one rub first, just to pick up some of the most of the resin, and now I'll use my other spatula to tidy up. I'll put that straight back in the bottle so we don't make a mess. And I'm going to screed back a little bit from the other direction just to pull it back onto the board so it doesn't go off the edge there. Alright, and I'll just do my final run now. Now you really want it to be as thin as you can, so apply a decent bit of pressure and try not to let it bounce off the end of the board like I'm doing there. You can see how it's getting all thin. So sometimes I find that by doing it on a bit of an angle, you can minimize that. Anyway, it's a bit of a learnt skill. For this demonstration, I'm not going to spend too much time on it. It's good enough. It's not going to be perfect because I'm not focusing enough. And now I can lift it off in one sweep, and we get the result. So as you can see, the edge, it's not perfect. I'm not too worried about that. I'll put this straight back into the holder and close it so we don't get any dust in there. And now I can just go straight to removing this. Now obviously inspect it and make sure it looks okay. We have two chances to inspect this. One is at this stage, before we take the tape off, and the other one is post-baking. So the baking step is next. So after baking, I really highly recommend that you take a good look at the surface, and if you see any sort of contamination that looks problematic, like large contamination, small tiny pieces of dust are not a big issue, but large contamination can be an issue. And the other thing you might notice, especially with these polished boards, is sometimes something on the board some impurity or something will cause some surface tension issue, and you'll actually see it sort of like go really thin, like a pool in one area. And really the only thing you can do then is just to, whether you have that bad contamination or whether you have that sort of that surface tension type error, is to take it off, clean it off. It's very easy to clean. It's a very small amount of waste, and just do it again. It's just not worth. I mean, once you expose the resin and set it and cure it, you're pretty much done. It's pretty difficult to get off, but right up until you stick it in the UV exposer, you're pretty safe to be able to remove it and redo it as many times as you like, really. Alright, so we'll move the oven into scene here. I've already preheated this hot plate. It's set at 80 degrees and we'll run it there for 10 minutes. So while that's running, I'll just get this out of the screen, what we'll do is assume it's going to be okay. I'm going to show you the cleanup steps because I think they're important as well. So basically we can get rid of all of this excess here, and we'll scrape it straight back into the bottle here. And the same goes for this tool. You can just quickly capture all of that. And that's one of the good things about this flexible spatula, is that it will really flex and be able to pick it up off that curved surface quite nicely. Good enough, a little bit of residue. And then into the bottle. And while we're talking a little bit about cleaning up, in here as well, you'll notice over time that you might get some notable build-up in here as well. And in here as well, you can just use the spatula to pick that up and put it back in here as well. So, just don't let it build up too much, because you don't really want it running off the edge and into the side or anything like that. You can even screed the silkscreen directly here and just pick up a bit of the excess as well. So this is another working surface, I guess you could say. You don't have to be too fiddly about it. I don't think it's a big problem. We'll close that up. And we're done. So the final bit of cleanup is you've got your tissue here. So what I will do is I'll do the first clean with the tissue to catch all of the big stuff. I usually go with my screed first. Now that's going to leave some like fibrous lint or some garbage on there as well, so that's something we definitely don't want. But I just want to get rid of all of the big stuff first. And then the applier. And the last step for cleaning will be to use my lint-free cloth. You can see I've used it a couple of times already. Again, the screed always gets the first attention. And then the tools, just get rid of all your lint, garbage. Alright, so there are 3 tools that we used, nice and clean. And that's the total amount of stuff we've used. So I'm going to keep using that cloth a few more times, so it's got a lot of reuse. This is garbage. And we've only used a tiny little bit of IPA, and I think that's the point I want to really make here, so you don't use a lot of materials with the cleanup at all. It's very, very efficient. So that should be about good enough. I'm just going to knock it off the oven, off the hot plate here. $80 degrees is not that hot, so you still want to be a little bit careful. So that's what it looks like. It actually fell off the hot plate because I was shifting things around here for the filming, and I've got a little bit of dust on there, as you can see. But I'm not going to redo it for this little demonstration. That's not really the point. Obviously, you know, do your best to keep things clean. If you see, you know, obviously large impurities or something going wrong, then just redo it. That's all you need to do. So let me move this out of the way. And now we'll expose it. Five minutes and go. Alright, we're all done. So that's 5 minutes. See how we did. Yeah, there's a few bits of dust and stuff in there, but as you can see, it's cured and it would be ready to go. Now, I know that some people will talk about the thickness of the layer, etc. here, and I think the thickness is just right because we do put a second layer on later. And once you put so this is the 2 layers here, the first layer and then the second layer. And once you get that second layer on, I think the color is just right. And I've seen a few other people doing UV resin and they only do the 1 layer, but it's always really blotchy and the finish isn't great. But the finish that I get, even with the first layer, is pretty damn good. But it can be a bit blotchy at times. But once you get that second layer on, it just really unifies and becomes one nice clean color. So yeah, anyway, it works. 5 minutes, that's all you need to expose, and that's the point that I really wanted to show here. And obviously the new handling mechanism that I'm using as well. So not too bad, right? Well, there you go. That's it for this video. I do hope you found it useful, and with any luck, it won't be too long before I get the next video out. Anyway, I'll see you then.